session, I really want you guys to come away with one thing that you can take back with you back to your company. And a lot of this is going to come across as like very common sense, but as we know, lessons learned are rarely learned and seldom remembered. So if it can just like refresh something for you, that's good enough for me. And I'm really into a lot of idioms and cheesy sayings and stuff like that. So if you learn one new one, my best friend. I'm happy. So that's me. You're going to get to know me a little bit. I know you're probably up here and you're like, oh, who's that young Steve Jobs-esque woman? But no relation, just the same dress style. So I've been in the knowledge field for 9 years now. I know, I can't believe you think I all started at 10. So I did my Master's of Library and Information Studies at McGill University, and I started at the Library of Parliament. And there I worked on a lot of initiatives involving launching our first Twitter accounts, working on our first external blog, designing different databases and different ways of teaching senators how to use iPads. Like, you think that working with your clients are difficult, there's nothing like working for a very entitled politician all the time. And then later I moved into private industry at Shopify, which was a huge new challenge for me, but it was very interesting to see that the same things that I ran into when I was at the library are the same things I run into when I'm at Shopify. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Oh, in that picture, I was like doing something where you had to connect strings together, and basically that's like project management, is trying not to get too caught up in the weeds. So I mentioned that I come from this place of, my background is originally in the public sphere, working for the Library of Parliament. I worked at the Parliamentary Information and Research Service, which is akin to the Congressional Research Service here. My background is in economics and trade, so I don't know if you know too much about Canadian-American relations, but I know a lot about NAFTA, TPP, CETA, softwood lumber, dairy supply chain management, all things America doesn't like about Canada. So my job changed a lot in 2016. What I think is really interesting about working there is their mission is to be Parliament's preferred and trusted source of information and knowledge. So every day, analysts and librarians would connect parliamentarians. Oh, you're not on. Oh, you're on. Hopefully it's just loud. It's loud. Very loud. I'm so sorry. Okay, cool. So their preferred way to get information, and I think that's a lot of what we do here, is getting people their preferred and trusted information really quickly. So now I'm at Shopify, and the reason why I decided to leave the Library of Parliament is because I looked up at the chain, and I was just like, it's very interesting to find yourself at a place where you're like, this is what I wanted to do with my life, and then you're like, I'm young, and I've already reached it, great. And I kind of looked up and realized that if I wanted to move up, someone had to die or retire. And I'd always wanted to try my hand at private industry. And Shopify is in the town that I live in, Ottawa. That's where its headquarters are. It's very weird that it's there because you'd think of most like high-achieving tech companies would be in Silicon Valley or something, but we call sleepy little Ottawa home. So if you don't know, who here knows what Shopify is? Oh, this is much better than I was expecting. According to our marketing team, there's only 2% brand recognition of Shopify in the United States, but we just poured a boatload of money into branding, so it's working. Great. So we're the leading small and medium-sized enterprise e-commerce platform. We recently just reached the milestone of powering 1 million merchants, and we're really stoked about that. Deloitte just did a wonderful impact review of us, and apparently we contribute $183 billion of economic activity to the world. That's pretty exciting. I love it because our mission is to really empower entrepreneurs and empower buyers. And what I mean by that is we really power like a lot of mom and pop shops. So people who are really passionate about something can get their goods or whatever out to the end consumer, and you, the buyers, can make decisions about like who do you want to buy from? Is it important things like sustainability to you, shopping local? Do you want to support a particular artist? But we're putting that power back into the hands of the buyer and the entrepreneur. So Shopify started in 2006. And if you think about now, this is 13 years later, and we've grown astronomically. I started the company a little bit more than 2 years ago, and 65% of the company has started after me. So that makes you think about whatever knowledge solutions we have to scale very quickly and be pretty anti-fragile. And it's a daunting task. So what I find, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the culture of Shopify. People are always talking about like tech companies and their culture and how we need to like harness that. And when I joined Shopify and they're making you drink the Kool-Aid of your culture, you're a bit like, this is a cult. How is this happening? Like, why am I starting to believe all these things? So we have three really main principles, and those are that we work on a trust battery, and that is that we trust everyone in the company who's hired to make their own decisions, work on their work, do their autonomy, otherwise like treating them as adults, which sounds like, yeah, duh, we should treat everyone like adults, but it's amazing how much that often doesn't happen, and I'm sure everybody in this room knows that. Our next one is one of our values is to be a constant learner. And that means that we really work from a place of a growth mindset, and that every day through hard work, you learn more and you make mistakes and you learn from them and then you deliver on that. And then the final one is that we default to open internally. So that means we basically try to share everything. We are not a company of knowledge hoarders, and I know that there is a lot of companies where the knowledge is very siloed. I'm not gonna like throw Apple under the bus, but I am Apple, where there's like very big silos, and I mean that's something you constantly have to fight, right? People come from these places where they think that their knowledge is power, and you really have to change the mindset to thinking that sharing knowledge is power. And these are the things that are the first to go if you are not addressing them all the time. And I find it really helpful to have these type of mottos and stuff like that, so that when I'm talking to people, I can constantly go back to the cultural things that are important to us, that make that foundation, that make it easy for us to share knowledge. So the mission of Shopify is to make commerce better for everyone. And I touched on the idea of the trust battery, and that trust battery goes beyond just the internal company out to our merchants and out to our buyers and out to our partners. And if you heard what I said about the mission of the Library of Parliament, it's to be Parliament's preferred and trusted source for information and knowledge. Both of these institutions are built on a foundation of trust. And I would wager that every institution here, where everyone is from, is built on a foundation of trust. We are judged based on the information that we give to people. People will often interact with our information and our knowledge before they ever interact with us. That's our hello, that's our first meeting. And I'm a true believer that knowledge management is a service. And what I mean by that is it often has to be like very high touch, and we are helping people and augmenting them. We may be the subject matter experts in knowledge management, but we're never the subject matter experts in whatever we're helping that our end users do. So what I want to take from this, where we're going, is that all of our companies are very different. Shopify is very different from, say, a hospital or even the Library of Parliament. And so the solutions that I have are probably not the solutions that will work for your team, but I guarantee you that 100% of my mistakes are the same mistakes that you can make. Yes, and I really firmly believe that mistakes and failure is what leads to success. Your ability to fail quickly, fail openly, fail transparently, and get back up and learn from those mistakes is the thing that will create your success. And I think it's fair to say, like, when you think about, not everyone in this room might be a project manager, but you all work on projects, and you always have to be a good stakeholder on projects. And most projects fail from the same things. It's poor communication, not clearly delineated roles and responsibilities, scope creep, inability to bring truth to power, and not setting expectations right at the beginning. So that's some of my thoughts. So getting into that, like, this is going to be a lot about the different failures that I have gone through. We're going to get into some of the models. So models and methods that we use at Shopify to, as we say, get shit done. So, and that's literally what we say. So this is that little italicized thing in the very poor teal font up there is the mission statement of my team. So my team is a tiny, but small but mighty team within a larger KM organization at Shopify, and we go out to different parts of the company and build knowledge solutions for different areas. And the things that are important to us is that it's tailored, simple, and sustainable. And I mean it in that order. If it can't be sustainable, it better be tailored and simple. And if it can't be simple and sustainable, it better be tailored. And so if you look at this, when I say tailored, I mean built with the end user and focused on their needs. One of my favorite sayings is nothing about us without us. And I think that's very important when it comes to KM, because if you create a system that has friction in it, that doesn't really work with the workflow that people are already used to working, you're gonna have a really hard time getting adoption unless you can sell it hard. And sustainable to me means that it's reusable and scalable. And as I said at Shopify, 65% of the companies started after me. I have no idea how much we're going to grow in the next 2 years, let alone next 5 years. So when we are building solutions, we always have to think about, like, what is this growth going to look like? But we've constantly been growing. What happens if there's a recession and the company has to become smaller? I also have to consider that. There was an incident that happened at Shopify where there's a bit of overhiring. And what was really interesting is we had never experienced that. We had never, ever been able to reach our target for hiring. And so we had nothing in place to be like the tripwire to tell people to like slow down that funnel, because that was a future we never thought was going to happen. So that's why it's important to sometimes think of those weird, strange things that you think never going to happen in a million years, because they do. So this is our KM triangle. This is developed by my director, Dana Tessier. She's rad, and how we do work within the KM org. So it begins by identifying and capturing knowledge, and that includes feedback. And what that is we go out, we look for the commonly recurring processes, the commonly recurring questions, the type of things, maybe there's a new product launching, and that we need to capture that information. And it's kind of based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the thing at the bottom, everything else is built on when we get all the way up. So in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it starts with like food, anything physiological, and ends with self-actualization. So organizational learning and self-actualization are basically the same thing. So everything is built on top of one another. And then from there, from identifying and capturing, we move up to storing knowledge. So putting it in the right format, finding the right place for it, like what's gonna work with the people that we're building it for. And then we move on to knowledge sharing, getting it out to them, making sure they know how to use the tool, making sure they know that it's accessible, and then we see them using it. And then we collect feedback on that use. Was it right? Was it correct? Is there anything that needs to be tweaked? And then from there, once it becomes part of like our common wisdom of the company, we build on that. So an example of this in action is knowledge management falls within the support organization. And if we have a new product coming down the pipeline, there's a team that liaises with product, and they feed the information to our support training team about what they need to build. So they're identifying and capturing that information from product. From there, the support training team builds a bridge course. So that's a tool that uses bridge. So they store the knowledge in the right place, and then they give it to our support organization, our frontline staff, our customer service, who then use it to answer questions from our from our merchants. From there, we collect feedback from our merchants about what areas of the product are they having friction or difficulty with, and these people who first identified and captured that information go and do deep dives into our support tickets and look for that information and then feed that back to product in an effort to mitigate the types of friction that people are having in our product. So not only are we trying to train people to better answer questions that our merchants are having, but we're also trying to feed that information to product so that doesn't even happen in the first place, so that they can fix some of the technical issues that we're going into. And it all becomes part of organizational learning. It's great. So this is get shit done. This is the project management ideology sort of construct that we use at Shopify for getting things done, both on the product and more the infrastructure in internal operations. So there's 4, it's a very lightweight framework, and there are 4 things. There's think, explore, build, and launch. You'll notice in the bottom, the official term is done. I'm not a huge fan of done because it means that you're not really paying attention to what's going on. I love launch because if you think of a ship, like once it's out in the water, your problems don't stop. I mean, think of the Titanic. You always have to be looking at the things that you can improve, especially as Shopify is a place that really works on the MVP model, so minimum viable product, and from there we iterate. So when you're going through these phases, think is really getting into what problem are we trying to solve? Is there a problem even to begin with that we're trying to solve, or somebody in manufacturing urgency, or do we just have like a really cool solution that we want to implement? And you really want to have a diverse opinion of thought in this area, because if you only talk to one group, you're only getting their opinion, and they might just be squeaky wheels. You're really thinking about like, who's the 80% that I'm designing for here? And an explore is when you start to look more at solutions and what you're going to do, and you test out many different things. And this is where you should be like failing a lot. You should be trying something out. It's not great. You should be talking to people, seeing what other people have done, really looking at those lessons learned. And then once you've identified the best solution, you start to build. And this is when we really think about the MVP and we think about iterating. We always want to get something out, unless obviously it's something very sensitive like HR or something. Getting something out pretty quickly, pretty lightweight, and then from there iterating upon that. And then once we feel good about it and we have all decided together in the think phase what done means to us, we launch the product. And a launch is never done until there's a retro, and you put it somewhere that everyone can read it. And we have a project management software that we put all our retros in, and then that like tie up the project with a nice bow. So that's how we do that in terms of project management. And when I put the two together, I like to think about the identify and capture being the think, the storing being explore, the knowledge sharing being build, and the knowledge use being launch. And I wish I could redo this slide because I'd put organizational learning as live. That's how you live it. Okay. So now into what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk us through think, explore, build, and launch. And I'm going to share you stories about things that I've messed up on. I almost said effed up on. And my one buddy, he's a crisis manager for the UK government. He's in foreign affairs. And he just keeps getting sent home for Brexit, like a Brexit that's not happening. And he was like, oh, that's called isomorphic learning. And I was like, great, but that's really for real tragedies. He was like Challenger. And I was like, oh, it's great that the person who presents two before me is from NASA. So isomorphic learning is learning from other companies' similar disasters. Not that I would say that all of these are disasters, but maybe some of them. What's important to remember is these were all some of them hard-learned lessons. And now before I start any project, I think of them at the beginning. I spend a lot of time thinking about my project before I actually start my project. It's always finding like the nice balance between thinking too much and moving forward, and that only comes with time. This is attributed to Aristotle. He spoke about it in his I guess, book, maybe scroll, or he orated, or well begun is half done. And so I always think about that. If I can start something off on the right foot, it's kind of smooth sailing from there. Okay, no, that's not true. Okay, so in the think phase, we talked a bit about this, oftentimes people see some really cool tool or someone comes to them and they have a solution to a problem and you're like, yeah, let's do this. But the reality is that you have no concept of what the problem is. In the think phase, the most important thing to do is to fall deeply in love with your problem. I have a great example of this today. So in May, with my team, launched a new intranet for the company. We worked really closely. It's built internally, and we worked very closely with our internal IT team to build it. And today I was noticing, I was getting ready to give this talk, and I was looking at what the public numbers were, and I noticed that our internal tool didn't match what was externally facing to the company. And I was like, well, shit, man. The things that are internal should be more up to date than the things that are external. So what's going on here? And so I reached out to the people who are in charge of the notifications that push people to update the tool. And I was like, we need to add people updating their pages to this, whatever. This is what we got to do. And the person was like, how much of a problem do you know this actually is? How many pages does this affect? How many people are doing this? What's the average time it takes for a page to go out of date? And I was like, oh man, yeah, I don't have the answers to any of those things. I just assumed because I worked so long on this project that I obviously knew best. But the reality is that I didn't. And too often, if you don't even have a really thorough understanding of the problem, you can end up solving for something that doesn't actually solve your problem. When I think about this, I think about the Henry Ford quote that's like, if I'd listened to my customers, we would have just made them faster horses, right? And and that quote is so wrong because Henry Ford just doesn't get it. The people are telling them exactly what they want. They want a fast way of getting there. They just don't know the proper way to articulate it. And he's only asking one person, the people who use horses. If he were to go and talk to the people making the streets and doing the infrastructure of the municipality, they'd be like, Yeah, what I want is horses that don't poop, because they were having a huge manure problem. So from those things is like, you need something cleaner and you need something faster, and bam, you get a car. And so this is one of the things that highlights to me the importance of talking to a diverse group of people. And especially since if you only talk to one group, they might just be a squeaky wheel. It might be an outlier. You always want to design in terms of because we're design first, like an engineering first company, we really build based on the 80%, and that 20% is an outlier. If your product's perfect, you're probably too slow, and it's not going to be perfect. Like, just throw that out there. You're never going to please everyone, and that's okay. So that's my importance about falling in love with the problem. So also, you probably, you sometimes get together a new team, and you're all there for the right reasons, or you think you're there for the right reasons. It's supposed to say, you forget, it's right. It's right. But it's so easy to forget the little things that are really important. The other week, we had senior leadership of KM all at an onsite together doing our 2020 planning. We had just gotten a new team from a different part of the company to come in, and they just joined our team and everything, and we were all going around the room talking about one thing we wanted to learn over the next 2 days. And so we all go around the room and we're all saying what we're going to learn. And when we get our feedback form later, we send out feedback. We want to make everything better, right? At the end of the 2 days, a bunch of people wrote, "No one introduced themselves." And it's these small, tiny things are the very first thing to go, because you think you know everything. We assume that we're all on the same page. We think we're all here for the same reasons, but you don't really necessarily know. And a great team is a team that feels psychologically safe to be with one another and to speak up. And if you don't know each other's names, how are you going to tell someone they're wrong? So Google did some really wonderful research into what makes a very good team. It's all available online through their rework. And the most successful teams and projects that I've ever been on had these 5 things. So psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity. We all knew why we were there, and we felt like the work we were doing was impactful. I really attribute the success of the intranet project at Shopify to, honestly, I met the product manager I would be working with here. He and I were both sent to this conference, and so we had to spend 4 days together. And I was new to the company, and he and I just got to know each other really well. And because of that, I felt very comfortable talking to him about different things while he was building the product and my team was delivering on the more human process side of it. But it can be a double-edged sword, because we became such good friends that we were sometimes in the same room, and we would be my team would be too scared to necessarily push back really hard on some things, because we didn't want to upset our friends on the other team. And so there were certain things where they wanted to have really aggressive launches, and we didn't feel we were necessarily ready with the training and stuff like that, and we didn't speak up. And then later, we saw that was detrimental to our project. If we had just taken a week or 2 more and been able to handle some of the inload of questions we kind of came up with, we could have had a smoother launch. And so it's something really to think about, that there is something called ruinous empathy. And that's covered in Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor, and that's a book I highly recommend about giving feedback. You can be an asshole, but you can also be too nice. So now we're on to the explore phase. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Carol, and I'm going to say her last name wrong, Dreck's work on growth versus fixed mindset. I think I mentioned to you that at Shopify, one of our core values is to be a constant learner. And what I see happen often is people come into a situation and they think they know the right way to do something. But as I mentioned earlier, and as in KM, we are the experts in knowledge management. We were not necessarily the expert in the subject that we're helping someone build something for. And so the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset is fixed is the idea that your intelligence is static and it's something you're born with and you don't progress from there. And a growth mindset is those people who think that intelligence comes from a place that it can grow, it's from hard work, it's from failing, and that you can always improve that way. If you look at very wonderful hockey players, I don't even like hockey, and I just did the most Canadian thing ever. Yeah, not a fan of the sport. Skiers, I'm a very big skier. Skiers and musicians and stuff like that, the thing that separates them from being great from the average talented individual is just hard work and time put into it. And that's what a growth mindset is. So I think this also goes with approaching problems naively. I'm sure you've been in a place where you've been in a company a long time, you have a bit of baggage, and you're like, that'll never work. And then some like young hotshot comes in and somehow gets it to work. And you're like, and this happened to me, but the person wasn't a young hotshot. They were definitely like older than me, but just amazing. And I was like, that's never going to work at the company. And it 100% did. And so approaching problems naively is important, because at some point, like what worked at one time or didn't work at one time, your company's always changing. Like it's important to try new things, but it's also important to remember that the solution might present itself to you, and the solution that you think might be the right solution might not be it. And my example of this is I built a taxonomy, a controlled vocabulary for our frontline support in a way to tag different support tickets that came in and to attribute support debt to product. So I could tell product like, if a support call is like $27, you could be like this $1 million worth of debt is happening because of your part of product. And I came from the library where we also tracked the questions that were coming in from parliamentarians. And we had a quite advanced taxonomy that went a couple layers deep. And so I was like 100% we're going into multi-tagging, like for sure. That's the way that this Shopify one is going to go, is multi-tagging. But I forgot that I didn't really know the environment super well, and support staff do not have time to multi-tag or think very thoroughly about like what they're tagging something as. These are not experts in that. And so someone else who worked previously at a call center at a different company was like, no, the thing you can't tag the conversation holistically. You have to try to control as much as possible like what people are tagging in terms of like making it a smaller thing so there's universality across it. So instead of previously people tagging them holistically, so like what was talked about most, we went to something called initial interaction driver, which was what was the very first question they asked and what part of product did that relate to? Because our assumption was that if that's what caused them to call in, that was the part of product causing the most friction. And if we put it down to one small thing, we could use one tag. And the other thing we found was with more tags creates more buckets where there's more available, like more chance of error. So we went from like 180 tags down to like 83. And so yeah, we had much bigger buckets, but they were much more accurate buckets. And we had to do a lot of teaching to people that like, this is one data source. In order to make good research and analysis, you need more than one thing. Like you need multiple areas that you're drawing data from. So that was great. Like I 100% went into that thinking I knew what was the right answer. And I just had to put my pride aside and notice a good idea when I heard it. The other part of explore that I think is really important is to people say yes quickly without thinking about like what's within their control, or is this the right time, or is this even part of the project, right? And I think that when you're talking about what makes this really easy to say no or to say yes thoughtfully is when you, at the beginning, gotten really deep into what your problem is. And if you have decided on that, because then you can point to like, no, that's not actually within scope. And as I addressed earlier, scope creep is one of those huge things that projects fail at. And I often say like, it's very important to have boundaries. And I feel like that's something that like if anybody does therapy, your therapist says that to you all the time too. So that's really important to me. And where I see this happening right now to me all the time is I'm currently building a research repository for the company. And that brings up a lot of questions. There's a ton of different teams at Shopify that do research, and we're just looking at what the tool, we're not looking at the tool right now, we're looking at what the problem is. And the problem is that there's research all over the place. It's in Google Drive, no one's using it, tons of duplication of work, costing the company, I don't know how much money, but I'm trying to figure that out. And every time people come to me, they're like, well, what about the quality of the research? How do we know the research is good quality? And I have to be like, not in scope. I understand maybe that's a V2, but when I point to that the only things that are within my control and the control of the KM team is how do we submit this research, how do we find this research, putting it into a nice organizational structure, but in terms of it getting written, who decides what gets written, that's not within my control. While you have all these like very important people telling you that they want to look into the quality of it, and you have to shut them down, because if I did that, this project would go on forever and ever and ever and never get delivered. So, okay, now we're into the build phase. A lot of people do like very big bang ways to put stuff out, and you can do that, but it's fun to, in the beginning, release it to small groups of people and iterate upon that and get lots of feedback and see how you can improve. One of my favorite sayings is by John Steinbeck, and it's that, and now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. It's from East of Eden. And that is like one of the driving forces behind me, because I can get really stuck on wanting it to be a wonderful experience. But if I waited that long, the company would never have what it needed. And so it's really, when you're talking about external things, that means to us, like if we're building a product, we release it to 10% of merchants, and then we level it up to 20, and we get feedback, and we're always building on that feedback and trying to make it incrementally better. Internally, sometimes, like for example, like an intranet, you don't really get that, but instead what we've done in order to help with change management, we put together a group that was it was representative of the demographics of the company, so across tenure, across product lines and service lines, across age groups, and across disciplines. And we wanted it to be like a really poorly kept secret that we were working on this, and slowly got feedback from these people and iterated upon that. And so maybe the whole company hadn't seen it by the time we launched it, but we felt like we'd gotten a lot of good feedback from a diverse group of people. And then we also realized that we had to launch before we had some key features already completed. So we put together a roadmap and put them up on the actual intranet to show people like these are coming and these are coming when, and they could subscribe to a vault page. That's what our intranet's called, the vault, and they could watch and see when they were coming along. And then anybody who gave us feedback about those features, we always followed up with them. Iteration is key. So yeah, build. Ask for and address targeted feedback. Oftentimes we just like ask willy-nilly for feedback, and I don't know if any people like know about how like the census, and we always talk about census data at the Library of Parliament, but often what ends up happening is when you put out blanket call for feedback, you're either gonna get like the really happy people or the really angry people, and there's no in between. So you might over-index on people who hate one thing, and then you realize like, oh shit, nobody actually really hated that except for this small group of people. So I often think about things in terms of like product, and I think about product feedback versus feature feedback. And product is like the direction of the tool or the direction of the infrastructure that you're building, and the feature is like what's the color of the button. And so you have to know who to go for those different things. This is a great story. So we launched our intranet on May 8th. And that evening, I go to a concert. I drive 2 hours, and I go to Montreal to go to a concert. And then I pull out my phone as I arrive in Montreal, and my phone is blown up. And what I had discovered was that our CEO had come into one of our Slack channels and said, gave us some really great feedback, but it was kind of like, oh shit, this is already out into the open, and everybody's already looking at it. And it's hard to get that feedback right when you feel like really proud about something and you feel really good about it. And so you're a little bit angry. You're like, but in hindsight, the feedback he gave was great. And we ended up implementing it. But what I learned from that is we had seeked out a lot of feature feedback. We'd ask people how they felt about the look and feel of certain things, but we hadn't looked for enough product feedback. So like, what are the big themes that we wanted to see across this tool? And so I think it's really important to think about, if going back, I would spend more time thinking about the types of feedback that I was getting and making sure that it was not only the frontline user that was using it, but some of the people who were very vested in it. Because our CEO originally made the intranet over a weekend back in like 2004 or something. I don't know, it's probably not then, like 2009. So he obviously cared. So now you're ready to launch. Honestly, this one it should always be at the very, very beginning. Communication is so important to any project. And anytime I start a project, I like to start with a comms plan. I like to sit down with my stakeholders and tell them, like, this is how I'm going to communicate with you. This is how I expect you to communicate with me. And if I promise to send you a weekly or bi-weekly update, I expect you to read it. And what I mean by communicate strategically is that in the book Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, he's the guy who started Pixar, He talks about that a project manager is a person who's able to ride an elevator up and down and talk about your project at different levels of abstraction. So you're able to go to the front lines and talk to them about why this is important to them, as well as to the C-suite and talk about why this initiative is important. I think KM is a lot of selling. And before I go in and talk to somebody about like why this initiative is important to them, I really try to think about how are they already doing KM and talking to those good behaviors. I like to think about like what's in it for them. And I also try to find out like what's their Myers-Briggs or their Enneagram or whatever it is, and like sell to what motivates them. And so I think that these things are really important. I also know that you can communicate a message widely and nothing will get done. For our Vault project, we told people like to get ready for this intranet, to start cleaning up the old content. So we went up, we did this great presentation, told everyone to clean it up, and everyone was super stoked, and then nothing happened, besides a few heroic individuals. And what was the problem there was the bystander effect. Like when it becomes a huge a huge tragedy of the commons. No one did anything. So our next one, we're getting ready to actually launch the new tool. We set out and found high impact users, the teams that had lots of content, and we stuck out individuals to help us with this, and we made it really high touch and talked to them and really tried to sell and tailor everything expressly to them. And so the last one is to celebrate small and quick wins. I've seen a lot of people come in and be put on big, huge infrastructure projects from outside the company or wherever, and they're like, this is how we're going to do it. And we talked about how KM and most companies are found on this foundation of trust. Like, why should I trust this person? I've never worked with them. I don't know what they do. So I always think it's important to get like something small under your belt to show people what you're capable of, that you're accountable, and that you're somebody who's trustworthy. As well, there's a great book called The Progress Principle, and it talks about the power of small wins. And one of the things we saw in that Google research was that people have to feel like their work is impactful. And if you only celebrate the actual launch of your project, how are people supposed to know they're being impactful along the way? In the Agile project methodology, you do things in 2-week sprints. So you break things down into these like actionable parts of the project. And it doesn't matter like if you're using Waterfall, Gantt, whatever. You can always break things down into small things, and you can celebrate those and the progress you've made. Because some of these things are very long. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And we'll all putter out if we don't like take the small wins where we can get them. Okay, so my big takeaway for you from this project is to fail often. And the ways that you can fail and the ways you can feel comfortable in failing is that you have built a trustworthy team that you feel comfortable talking about failure with, and that you communicate your failures often. When I was working on a taxonomy project, we had our launch all set up to go. Everyone knew it was happening. We had the training ready, and then the whole team got norovirus. So everybody was like sick and puking for 2 weeks, and so we had to delay the launch for a month. And as soon as I knew that, I was like, yeah, okay, this isn't happening. And I told everyone like, it's delayed, it's delayed, it's delayed, it's delayed. And when we launched it, everyone was like, oh my God, this project's great, and it happened on time and all this type of stuff. And I was like, oh, everyone forgot it was delayed because I just told everyone like the second I knew it was going to be delayed. People, if you have goodwill, people can be quite forgiving, I find. Sometimes not, but hopefully you've created some good, nice small wins with them that they are kind towards you. Anyways, so I mentioned some books, and I don't know if I mentioned some articles, but if you take out your phones and you take a picture of this, there's a whole bunch of articles or books, different things, project management tools that I really like that might be of interest to you. My favorite book is on there. I didn't mention it at all, but it's Let My People Go Surfing by Yvonne Chouinard, and I think it's the best business book. So that is my presentation, and I hope that you learned something from it. I think I have time for questions. Questions are my favorite part. So you can feel free to ask me anything about this, anything about Shopify, anything about anything, really. I'm an open book. Does anyone have any questions? Yes? What's the retro? Oh, great. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so another great thing to remember is to never use acronyms or short forms of words without first introducing them because people don't understand them. Retro stands for retrospective, and it's might be in another company called an after action review. And it's very common in the tech field to have retros or to have RCAs, root cause analysis, which is looking at like what caused the problem that you had. A root cause analysis is something very specific, while a retro would be looking back at like what went well, doing the 5 whys, and just trying to see about like what would you do differently, what was successful, why was it successful, and then putting that somewhere so that if somebody else is doing a similar project, they can learn from your successes and your failures. Mm-hmm. Yes?
You mentioned 780 sports
780 partners.
Okay, I remember the number of sports, and you mentioned about
Oh, the 180, yeah, we'll go back. Bop, 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 bop. Back. So many slides. Oh, wait, that was it. Yes.
number of experts.
Yes.
Are they paid experts or the subject matter experts?
So experts are people who are Oh, okay. So she's asking about what does the 780 plus number of experts in our network mean? So in Shopify, we have people who are experts on using their external people to the company, and they use Shopify. They are normally developers who are very capable at using our platform. And if somebody's looking for someone to help design their Shopify store, these are certified experts in using our platform. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you put your QR code back
Oh,
up again?
yes, definitely, of course.
Sorry.
Bop, 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 bop.
There we go.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Kathleen? Comments?
Oh,
Great
yeah.
presentation.
I hope I didn't talk too
Great
fast. Wait, why?